Let's see. One of your questions was how would I describe Grandpa? One of the things that always stood out to me about Grandpa was that he was very kind of gregarious. He was very easy to make friends with people, and part of that I think was he was a great storyteller. He'd be the kind of guy that you could sit down at a bar and have a beer with, and he would tell you the most interesting and fun stories. And I think that always drew people to him. So if there was a social engagement going on or a party going on, people would be drawn to Dad because he was just a very funny guy. He was quick to tell a joke. He had always really interesting stories to talk about his life, and he had a very interesting life. He did a lot of things throughout his life that were kind of interesting, meaningful, quirky, exciting, just kind of funny. So he was a very colorful person, someone you could really talk with and really learn a lot about. The other thing, Dad he was kind of an adventurous guy. He would do things that I would never dream of doing. Things like instead of going to college, I'm going to take a year off and just bum around and see the country, work at the national parks, get odd jobs. That's the kind of thing that I would never have enough guts to do. He would travel widely. He would make friends really easily. Traveled the world. He was just a really interesting guy. There was another story I know about a serial killer that Grandpa told about, and I don't know if you remember, but when Grandpa finished high school, he decided at that time he wasn't going to run off to college. He wanted to kind of see the world a little bit. So he took a year off, and he worked in the national parks for a while. He did odd jobs, and he just kind of bummed around the country for a year. And so he had a car, and he did a lot of hitchhiking himself, and he was a very gregarious person, so he'd kind of meet up with people and talk and everything like that. So during one stretch, he was kind of driving through an area, and he picked up a hitchhiker, and, because Dad liked company, liked to talk with people, and so this hitchhiker kind of came into the car with them, and they drove a stretch and just chatted a little bit. And the hitchhiker, after a while, said, why don't you just let me out here? I think I'm going to head off a different direction. So Dad let him off and didn't really think about it. And then later he learned on the news that there was this guy hitchhiking through that area, picking up people and killing them, and I guess robbing them or whatever he was doing. And when they finally caught the guy, and one of the people that he had gotten in the car with was Dad, and they asked him, why didn't you kill him? And he goes, well, he was a gymnast, he was a big muscular guy, and he looked like he would have been a tough person to take down, so I decided I'd just kind of move on to the next person. So he had a kind of a close call with a serial Pan American Games. So the Pan American Games are like the Olympics, but just for one hemisphere. So the Pan American Games are for all the countries competing in the North America and South America. And I think it goes on every 4 years. And has all the traditional Olympic events. So it's a pretty big deal. And Grandpa competed at one of them in Argentina. And at that time, Argentina was going through their political crisis with Eva Perón and kind of the dictatorship. And it was kind of a military state at that point with very tight restrictions on the press and very tight restrictions on demonstrations, and there were military police everywhere with machine guns. It was a very close-knit society. And Grandpa was competing, and after his competition was done, he and one of his friends, I can't remember if it was a boxer or a wrestler, but he and a buddy decided they were going to take in some of the sights. And he had taken a lot of video on a 8mm camera. He was taking lots of video of the boxing and the weightlifting and a lot of the other competitions. And afterwards, he was kind of just messing around with his buddy, and there was 2 Argentinian guards who had machine guns. And so he said, well, let's get some pictures with these guards. So they were kind of chumming up with them, holding their hands, and putting their arms around them, and getting pictures taken with these armed guards. And then they got on a train to head off to another city and continue their sightseeing. And apparently, taking pictures with an armed guard was a big no-no. Again, because it was such a tightly restricted and politically restricted country at that time. If you were seen, taking pictures of anything having to do with the military, it was like that you were a spy or you were some kind of a infiltrator trying to overthrow the government. So when the police found out that he had taken pictures with these troops, they tried to take away his video. So they actually stopped the train he and his buddy were on, and armed military guards came on with their machine guns drawn and came up to the seat that he was at and demanded that he turn over his film, and didn't take no for an answer. They took his camera, took his film, and confiscated it. And then they didn't quite arrest him, but they accused him in no certain terms of being a spy and taking these films as spying for the American government. And that became a news story. And in fact, Grandma was woken up by her grandpa, who came and stuffed the Tampa Tribune under her nose and said, "Look here, this is the boy that you're going out with. Well, look right here." And on the front page of the Tampa Tribune was a story about Dad being a spy in Argentina and being arrested and having his film confiscated. So that was probably the craziest thing that happened in the Pan American Games for him. So the next question is, how did Grandpa get involved in gymnastics? Well, he grew up in Chicago, and at that time, Chicago had a pretty good emphasis on gymnastics. It was very popular in all the high schools. Most high schools had a active and vigorous gymnastics program. And also, Dad's heritage was German, and the Germans were very well known for their gymnastics prowess. So they typically would have very dominant teams in the Olympics, and a lot of people in Germany would go through gymnastics, and it was kind of a popular sport there. So he kind of had that background growing up. But the event that really made him take gymnastics very seriously and really get his career going was he attended a movie showing of the 1936 Olympics. His dad took him to the theater, and they were showing this documentary, the 1936 Olympics, which is a very famous movie about the Olympics. In fact, I think, Kristen, I think you saw that. We watched clips of it. It was on YouTube. But in any event, the documentary showcased the tremendous, just the awe and the spectacle and the tremendous accomplishment of being an Olympian and what it takes to do that, and the glory and the satisfaction of competing at that level and all the pageantry and everything. And it really inspired Dad. And he told his dad, your great-grandpa, he said, I really want to be an Olympian. I want to be an Olympic gymnast. And Grandpa said, all right, if that's what you want, I'll work with you. I'll make sure that you get to that level. I'll give you everything you need. So he started getting private lessons from a pretty colorful coach named Jimmy Rosanis, who was a tumbling coach for all of the professional dancers in Chicago at the time. Like New York has the Rockettes, the New York City Rockettes, and Chicago had a similar dance company, and they had to do tumbling routines. So Jimmy Rosanis was a kind of a famous tumbling instructor, and Dad would have lessons with him on a regular basis. He also attended a German gymnastics camp. In fact, he even sent me to that camp several summers. They were called the Ike Turners, and they were kind of a famous gymnastics training group. And he took his studies very seriously. He worked very, very hard, and he became a state champion high school gymnast. And then as he went to college, that set the stage for his going off to the Olympics. So he was an Olympic gymnast in the 1948 Olympics in London, and then he competed in the 1952 Olympics in Helsinki. So how did Dad get his driver's license, or how did Grandpa get his driver's license? So he was living in Chicago at the time, and he had done all his driver's training. And in those days, you did your driver's education training as part of physical education. So everyone had to take PE, where you do PE classes and go to the locker room and change into your gym shorts and play basketball or baseball or whatever they were doing. But then during part of the year, instead of doing PE, you did driver's education. So he used to tell me stories that they had these simulated driving cars where you'd sit in a car and there was like a video playing of traffic, and you had to, turn your right turn indicator on and press the accelerator, and it would kind of record how you're doing. So Dad said he would usually just take a heavy object like a brick or something, put it on the gas pedal, and then just sleep, and so that it would at least record that he was in one of these simulators. But he thought it was ridiculous going through these driver simulation things. But anyway, after he finished that and it was time to do his driving test, he went with his dad, who was the building inspector for the city of Chicago, and he was very well known. And if you know anything about the politics of the city of Chicago, there was always a lot of graft and a lot of bribing, and a lot of people would pay bribes to get things done in the city of Chicago. So everybody knew Grandpa's father, because he's the building inspector, and if you wanted to get your buildings passed, he had to approve it. So anyway, we went to the driver's education place with his dad, and it was kind of a bitter, cold day, winter day in Chicago. There was a lot of snow. The weather was bad. So he went up to the guy to take his test, and the guy saw that it was Grandpa, the building inspector, who he knew, and they shook hands and everything. He says, well, he kind of looked out the window. Well, the weather's bad. There's a lot of snow out there. If you think your boy can drive the car, that's fine by me. Let me just go ahead and sign up on his driver's license here. So he never even had to take a test or anything. He just showed up, got his license, and left.